Good afternoon, everyone. Apparently our subcommittee now works like the full committee, and when I touch the button, we begin recording. So welcome to the PSTE subcommittee. Today we are hearing 4 budgets: subsequent injury fund, SCS community supervision, SCS police and correctional training commissions, and the Department of Juvenile Services. But before we get started, Senator Jackson wanted a point of personal privilege. Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Before we get started, today, later on, I have a hearing in judicial proceedings. And that hearing will consist of my testimony regarding the agency I retired from that born me, Prince George's County Sheriff's Office. But I want to just introduce to you all who may have not met him as of yet, the newly elected Sheriff of Prince George's County, John Carr. John, can you stand up? John served with me on the agency. I've known him since day one. He's a great asset to the public safety community, and thank you, Madam Chair, for that brief intro.
Of course. Thank you, Senator. Okay, so we will start with subsequent injury fund. Jason Kramer is our analyst. Jason, take it away.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Jason Kramer, and I'll be presenting the analysis for the subsequent injury fund. The SIF compensates injured workers whose pre-existing injuries are worsened by a current injury. The agency receives special funds from a 6.5% assessment on awards against employers or insurers for disability or death, and amounts payable by employers or insurers under settlement agreements. Starting off at the bottom of page 1 here, the agency's budget increases by 4.7% to $2.9 million in special funds. Turning next to page 2, Exhibit 1 shows an overview of the agency's spending in the fiscal 2024 allowance. The agency's costs are driven almost entirely by personnel, as shown here. 84% of the allowance is for personnel costs. Exhibit 2 on page 3 shows changes in the agency budget. As I noted, the budget increases by just under 5%. Most of that growth is due to personnel, specifically in health insurance and the annualization of a cost of living increase in fiscal 2024. Moving on to page 5, Exhibit 3. This exhibit shows assessment revenue that is collected by the agency after a small dip in fiscal 2021 due to a change in the size of the assessment from 6.5% to 5.5% for that year only. You can see revenues were down in that year, but the return of the rate to the regular 6.5% in fiscal 2022 resulted in revenues of $27.7 million, an increase of nearly $5 million over the prior year. Exhibit 4 on page 6, as you can see, that revenue growth as it exceeds expenses and benefits payouts results in fund growth. The fund has grown at approximately 4% per year over the last decade. The fund balance grew by about 5.5% in fiscal 2022, closing at $114.3 million. The most recent actuarial study done for the agency that was issued in January of 2022 found unpaid liabilities, unfunded liabilities between $315 million and $550 million, depending on which assumptions were accepted. And DLS has just asked SIF to comment on the appropriateness of its assessment rate and its future plans for actuarial studies. With that, I would say that DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance, and I conclude my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jason. Questions for the analyst? Okay, we're happy to have Director Dodds with us. Director Dodds, take it away.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today. I'm joined by Mrs. Rose Hunt. She's our Fiscal Services Administrator. You have my testimony, the highlights on page 2, the 4th paragraph. The actuary did acknowledge, as Mr. Kramer said, a 4% annual SIF budget growth, balance growth over the last 10 years. And we have a projected growth of 3.77% for the current fiscal year. We agree with the actuary's recommendation to continue the current 6.5% assessment rate. We feel that we're positioned well to continue to meet the obligations that we have to injured Maryland workers. Regarding the actuary study, we certainly agree with the points made by the actuary in terms of our obligation to continue to monitor our assessments receipts versus our benefit payments, our liability estimation rates versus the commission actual awards. And we're also looking at making improvements to our case control system to better capture that data. And I'm just saying that I think we are once again well positioned to meet the obligations in the next few years, and we'd like to continue the 6.5% assessment. Our feeling is that we are currently on a 5 to 6 year actuary plan. We think it would probably be best if we broke that down to maybe 4 years. The cost of the actuary study is about $50,000. Since we're well positioned with the current 6.5% assessment, I think 4 years from now would be a good time to do the next study. If in fact our reserves dip for some reason that we do not anticipate, we certainly will look at that and accelerate that 4-year plan. And we respectfully request the committee's positive action on the recommended allocation for the fiscal year.
Thank you, Director Dodd. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for making the trip.
We appreciate it.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you. Okay, next we have DPSCS Community Supervision. We have Jacob Cash as our analyst, and we have Acting Secretary Scruggs with us. And just a note for folks in the audience and at home, a number of us might have bill hearings during the hearing. So if you see us in and out, it's not because they don't care deeply about these budgets. They just have to be in 2 places at once. So, Jacob.
So thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sharing the analysis presentation document with everybody. But to start off with, the Division of Parole and Probation, as well as the Maryland Parole Commission, make up the community supervision function within the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. These units together have a budget of $130 million in fiscal 2024. And that's a bit of an increase over recent trends. It's not the biggest increase over fiscal 2023. And that's because a good number of the increases have been cost of living adjustments, as well as step increases that were added to fiscal 2023. I'm speaking on that. There were $4.3 million added for step increases in 2023, and those are annualized in fiscal 2024. There has also been some issues with the drinking driver monitor program revenues, that they have not been as high as expenses have been for the program for the past few years. Since fiscal 2019, they've required general funds. There was a mistake in the fiscal 2023 allowance that did not include the 1.3 million in anticipated general fund needs. That's been added as a deficiency. And we're asking the department to comment on DDMP collections, including the reasons why revenues are not as high as expenses, what are the types of exemptions that individuals receive to not pay the DDMP fee, and if there's any way that the department can increase revenues so that general funds are not needed for this program. Exhibit 1 breaks down the $130 million allowance into where they primarily go. Personnel is the largest portion of this unit, and parole and probation officers make up the lion's share of those positions. There are a number of services that this unit provides for offenders. I'll be going into a little bit more detail on some of the new budgetary initiatives, but those are highlighted in the purple boxes. So the overall budget increases by $3.7 million, and most of those changes are in personnel, as I mentioned at the outset of the presentation. But as you can see in the other changes section of this exhibit, there are a few new initiatives, such as new SUD, substance use disorder treatment services, adding $780,000, new violence reduction and risk assessment trainings for employees to better improve their ability to place offenders properly among the various risk categories, as well as the violence reduction trainings to improve their communications with individuals who may be at higher risk of being involved in violent shootings or homicides. There's also a mobile app pilot program with $150,000 in fiscal 2024, and that is to speed up the process on the field and to allow a much quicker and agile use of the data the department has and the various forms that are needed to be accessed on the field. Exhibit 3 breaks down the agent position vacancies that this unit has experienced over the past 2 years. They have increased, although in the past 2 months, they've gone back down to more reasonable levels, but the vacancy rate is highlighted, or is the black line, and you can see that that has affected the filled positions in the green bars above. Those are lower than what the department had been operating at. And if cases hadn't been going down, that would have resulted in a larger or an increase in the caseload ratio. So Exhibit 4 shows the overall cases that were supervised during the year. Some of these cases, these cases can last a various amount of time throughout the year. So some of these have closed while others still remain active. The DDMP cases in the purple boxes are actually those at fiscal year end, whereas the other ones are the full scope of the year. Probation cases increased in fiscal 2022, and that's been the first year we've actually seen probation cases increased overall. Every other category continued the decline that we've seen over the course of the past decade, but probation cases, mostly because of court processing, have increased. Now, there's an issue with caseload ratios that I'd like to bring up, which is we've discussed a recommended level of about 83 for the department of cases to agents, and that represents what the American Parole and Probation Association has recommended as an upper limit of what departments should be operating at. Now, there's also more evidence coming from other states, such as Ohio, that lower ratios would have better effect on case outcomes. So something that we've tried to do is look at the case outcomes by region and compare those to the caseload ratios that those regions have had. Exhibit 5 shows those together, and the purple line shows the average caseload ratio for these regions. It does vary across regions, but I would point out that according to the ideal ratios proposed from Ohio, which would be about 1 to 200 for administrative employees, for administrative level supervisees, 1 to 50 for low and medium risk supervisees, and 1 to 20 for high and the highest risk supervisees. The recommended levels should be pretty similar across the regions at about 50, but the Capital and the West regions specifically have the furthest, have the caseload ratio furthest from that recommended level. They also tend to have not as satisfactory cases. The East and West region have the worst caseload ratios, the Capital and West regions have the worst caseload ratios, and they have some of the worst outcomes, and that's something the department or that DLS newly has information on, and the department should be focusing on the association between those. Exhibit 6 shows these across regions, as I mentioned in the previous exhibit. And this brings up another issue with the department's outcomes, which are those that are involved in homicides and non-fatal shootings. So the Office of Program Evaluation and Government Accountability within DLS found that 37% of all homicide victims and suspects, homicide and non-fatal shooting suspects and victims were Baltimore City supervisees. Following the OPEGA report, there's been a couple of reports requested of the agency on this, as well as a continuing annual report that will track the involvement. To review some of those numbers, the overall involvement in fiscal 2022 was about, sorry, I've got my place mixed up. But overall, there have been about 1.8% of deaths as an outcome of supervision. Now, obviously, the department does not control what the mortality of their supervisees, but they do have an influence of how much attention each of those supervisees are getting. Some of those after action reports were not being submitted in a timely fashion, and that's something the department has improved on in recent years. And there have been a number of oversight measures that they're implementing over the course of a few years. These are listed below, and most of these do not require budgetary additions, but they do require the reorganization of some personnel resources. So we're asking the department to comment on the extent that they would require personnel to be taken away from their job more to, for instance, attend some of these local coalition meetings. There are some other funding measures, which I mentioned in the budgetary section of this analysis. Here, this is what I was looking for earlier. So the supervisees that were involved in homicides or non-fatal shootings has decreased in 2022, but on average, the department is seeing about 1% involvement. There was a JCR report that the department submitted to provide much of this information that restricted $250,000, and DLS is recommending that those withheld funds be released. We're also recommending to continue the Division of Parole and Probation caseload report, which provided the caseload measures and outcomes that we saw above. And Appendix 1 at the end of the document summarizes those JCR reports that we've received. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Jacob. Questions for the analyst? Senator Rosepep.
Yes. Page 2, on the proposed efficiency, it refers to, in the second paragraph, the monthly program fee was increased in the BRFA in 2020 from $55 to $75. I apologize, I don't know what the monthly program fee is.
Right, so those that are assigned to DDMP from the courts are required to pay a fee every month for that supervision. It can be waived or reduced by the courts for a number of reasons. That's part of the bold language, is asking for what some of those reasons might be. But essentially, DLS would have expected revenues to at least increase some from that increase in the fee, but we haven't seen any increase.
Do we have any idea of what percentage of folks who are under supervision who are supposed to pay the fee actually do?
I'm not sure, actually, and that's something
I think that'd be a good question to pursue. So that was question number 1. Now that's comment. Page 12 in the after action review process, it talks about the screening tool. Maybe this is more for the department than for you, but I had trouble getting my head around how the screening actually works to figure out who needs the most intensive attention.
There's a 45-day administrative period. So those are like when it talks about administrative supervisees, those are ones that haven't been classified yet. And during that period, they're investigated by the agents, and they fill out different forms, one of which is a screening tool. And that tool, it just basically asks a number of questions about the offender, their history and background. And based on the results of that, there's an algorithm that places them in the proper category. That is validated every 2 years. So they look at the data and make sure, hey, we're placing these people in buckets. Are they actually that high risk? And so the tool is adjusted every 2 years based on the results of that.
So it's done by the agent checking boxes that then they're plugged into a program that says, if you check 5 boxes, they go in category A, and you check 10 boxes, they go in category B. Is that the way to think of it?
I think it's a little bit more qualitative than that, but essentially, yes, there's dozens of questions and fields that are required in order to get a right classification.
Okay, thank you. I'm happy to defer to others and then come back to some questions.
Other questions from the committee? I have a couple. I also bumped on the page 12, Senator Risbeth, the 54% who were involved as suspects of homicides or non-fatal shootings were graded at low or moderate supervision based on the risk assessment tool. Jacob, and perhaps I will ask the secretary this, but is there any human intervention when it comes to assigning level of supervision, or is it just this algorithm?
I personally haven't seen an agent fill it out, but I know there's a little bit of judgment call on some of the fields, and some are clearly based on sentences or the category of offenses. But there are more that relate towards the behavior of the offender that would be a little bit more subjective.
Okay. On page 13, I also took umbrage with bullet number 5, highest risk supervision for offenders with new gun charges that did not result in a violation of probation by the sentencing authority.
No kidding.
It's a little bit outside of our lane, but I'm very curious how often that occurs.
Anecdotally, I don't believe that occurs very often. It hasn't come up, and this is the first that I did see of that, but I know that it does come to the bottom line is that the sentencing authority, they can make that decision. So whether or not DPP believes they should be placed at the highest risk, if the sentencing authority, that even if DPP believes that they should have had a violation of probation, the sentencing authority can override that and decide what is best.
Perhaps we'll ask this of the judiciary when they're here next week. Okay. My last question or comment is on our operating recommended actions. I'm also curious, not just the vacancies by, as you have it outlined, but by supervision level, if that's the correct wordage, but low, moderate, or high risk. Do we have that breakdown?
No, we don't for case outcomes.
Yes. No. Okay. I'm going to recommend to the subcommittee that we perhaps add that and seek that moving forward. Okay. Any other questions, Senator Risbeth?
Yeah, thank you. Back on page 13, the third bullet, expansion of warrant apprehension unit to serve high-risk offenders and open warrants in Baltimore City not typically under its jurisdiction. I didn't really even understand the words. What does that mean?
So the warrant apprehension unit is a tool of the department to serve warrants to offenders under their supervision who have violated that supervision. The expansion of this jurisdiction would include some warrants that Baltimore City authorities would direct to other warrant apprehension units, so like the Baltimore City Police. Whereas this is directly under the department, and it's considered more of like a high octane team.
Well, I get what they're trying to do, but I don't understand the relationship between the department and Baltimore City.
It's basically shifting some of that response from Baltimore City to DPSES.
So the department is taking over what Baltimore City Police have been doing?
In part.
What's the other part?
Well, I mean, the Baltimore City Police still carrying out their normal warrants, but these are for the highest risk
But that's
offenders
what,
with
okay,
open warrants.
so the highest risk people, it's been shifted from Baltimore City Police to the department. You know what that means?
Yes, and I think the department should probably clarify
Okay,
exactly what that means. but
that's
yeah.
fine. Page 14. The top bullet, a community correction training module to better classify individuals under supervision based on risk. Again, I get the words, but I don't really understand what that means.
And that would be employee trainings, where they're sitting them down and going through better best practices.
So it's trying to train the folks to do the classification that the chair
Right.
was asking about.
Right.
Okay, that answers that question. Other questions are for the department. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rosebud. Going once, going twice. Okay. Acting Secretary Scruggs. Welcome.
Thank you.
Whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Chair Alford and members of the Senate Public Safety, Transportation, and Environment Committee. For the record, my name is Carolyn J. Scruggs, and I'm the Acting Secretary of the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. With me are David Blumberg, Chairman of the Maryland Parole Commission, Martha Danner, Director of the Division of Parole and Probation, Christina Lentz, Acting Deputy Secretary for Administration, and Naja Roberts, Chief Financial Officer. The department appreciates its ongoing collaboration with the Department of Legislative Services and also appreciates Mr. Cash's hard work and his thoughtful analysis. Community supervision is a very complex component of our public safety mission. It involves many stakeholders working in collaboration with the courts, local law enforcement, and many community services that are required to help people live successful lives. With regards to the analysis, DLS asks to discuss possible changes to the DDMP collections process that could increase revenues and the consequences of those changes. DDMP collection fees have historically reflected the size of the supervision population. FY 2021 was the lowest collection year on record. The impact of the pandemic on courts, economic hardships, and the subsequent 25% decrease in cases supervised played a significant part. DPP has a significant change in FY 2022 fee collection, which is in fact reflection of the increased fee rates, as it marks the first time that collection rates have increased while cases monitored continue to fall. Under the current system of collections, supervisees who owe monthly program fees are required to provide a certified check or money order as payment. These payments are mailed to a lockbox where they are received by DPP personnel and posted. The department is currently working on modifications to the offender case management system that would add a collections system of record for costs, fines, fees, and restitution. This will be in conjunction with an electronic web-based collection banking system, which will allow for additional payment options to replace the current system, which requires the supervised individual to mail their payment obligations to the lockbox for subsequent retrieval and posting. This project is currently in the business requirements phase. Next, DLS asks the department to comment on future steps to reduce DPP caseloads, improve caseloads outcome, and improve overall compliance with supervision conditions. DPP evaluates caseloads on a regular basis and makes adjustments as necessary. There are limitations to making outcome comparisons based purely on regional distribution statewide, including offense severity, risk factors as determined by the risk needs assessment, service needs, differences in parole and court orders, and other variations. The majority of DPP cases tend to be concentrated in the Baltimore metro and capital region, and the DPP constantly strives to adjust staffing ratios based on need. There is not much flexibility in adjusting ratios in the western and eastern regions, as active cases in these regions tend to require lower level supervision. As for improving caseloads, the biggest challenge is the same challenge that most state agencies and other employers are experiencing: difficulty in hiring and recruiting. DPP, along with the department's human resources, have been constantly recruiting and hiring parole and probation agents and drinking driver monitors. On February 1 of 2023, there were 30 agents starting the Parole and Probation Agent Academy, and the second academy will follow on March 30th of this year. In addition, DPP instituted the Retention Longevity Pay Incentive Program to assist with staffing levels. As of February 6, 2023, over 151 agents have enrolled in that program. The last issue, DLS asked us to comment on the extent to which any of these initiatives require additional funding, reallocation of resources, or impact to the workload of agents. Working in conjunction with DPP agents, social work positions have been added to the division. DPP continues to evaluate the impact of these various initiatives with regards to funding, resources, and workloads. Finally, we concur with the recommended action and are ready to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I'm going to start almost every hearing this year, saying that you inherited many of the challenges in front of you. We appreciate that. We want to work with you to solve them.
Thank you.
I'm going to start with the softball, and I'll start by, I tend to read these a little later at night, so my notes are, they can be comical, but I wrote on here about the check and money order. I wrote in here, it's 2023. So I appreciate that you're going through the process of modernizing that. Do you have a timeline for us?
Ms. Roberts, do we know where it's at in procurement?
At this time, we do not have a timeline as we are still evaluating what our exact needs are.
So finance is actually looking at that evaluation
Okay.
phase.
I hope that it will be resolved by the time we meet again next year. Okay. Other questions? I have a list, but Senator Rosepep.
Back to the question that the chair raised and I alluded to on 12 and 13 relating to the system you have to evaluating risk, and the note on 12 of the offenders involved as suspects in homicides or non-fatal shootings, 54% were identified as low or moderate based on the assessment risk. That suggests either the assessment risk isn't very good or the assessment is almost impossible to do. And I'm curious what your view on that is.
So what I'll do is I'm gonna ask Director Danner to explain for you the assessment, the risk assessment tool that we're using, and then maybe it's a little more clear to you, so you understand how we do that.
Okay, all right.
Thank you, Senator. I do have to correct the algorithm piece, as we no longer use that process. When JRA was instituted, our risk needs instruments must be validated and revalidated every 3 years. So we have a standing VPI risk screener.
I'm saying standard what?
VPI risk screener, Violent Prevention Initiative. And everybody that is 30 and under is screened for that. And that was just validated to be a correct instrument. We also have an initial risk screener, and we had to adjust that recently through our revalidation study to determine the risk levels for high, moderate, low, moderate, and low. We were using the level service inventory risk assessment to identify risk and needs, and our revalidation study found that that instrument was more appropriate just to identify needs. And that's why we are temporarily adjusted the initial risk screener from the validators. And we are currently under a revalidation study to find an appropriate risk needs instrument to be utilized by the Division of Parole and Probation.
I get the procedure, but I'm really going back to the bigger question. I mean, why is it so hard? Is it just so hard and therefore other people can't do it across the country? And so it's almost random, or is it we're not doing it well?
Well, part of the revalidation study found that for the level service risk inventory, we needed to enhance our training and improve on that mechanism because motivational interviewing is part of that. And on the risk screener, we have to look at criminal history and things like that. But if you look at our outcomes, they have been pretty accurate on our risk needs responsivity. And when we say homicide and non-fatal shooting involved, if you look at it, it is combining the victims and the suspects.
I understand that.
So the majority of our victims are low, moderate. So it's not as if they were suspects.
So if you disaggregated this data, it would show a different percentage for victims and for suspects?
I would think so, sir, but we'll get back to you.
If you look into that. And I want to ask the other question.
Senators, I just want to double down on that. I think
Please.
that's very important for us. This has been a concern for the last 3+ years, a concern of Senate leadership and House leadership as well. So if you could disaggregate that data for us before we make final budget decisions, I think it would help inform our position.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Great. And I wanted to go to page 13 on the question that the chair asked about heightened risk supervision for offenders with new gun charges that did not result in a violation of probation by the sentencing authority. So is that a situation in which you recommended, your folks recommended a parole violation and a judge said no? Is that the fact?
That happens when we request action on an individual that incurs a new gun charge. And we take them back to court and they are continued under supervision.
Do you have
Because-
data on that?
Pardon?
Do you have data on that?
We will
If
present
you like-
that.
I mean, I'd really like to know how many, for what, and why. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Secretary, Madam Director. A couple of questions. Could you elaborate more on the warrant apprehension units increased role in the city? And could you put that in the perspective of pre-COVID and now? Understanding what the unit does, wanting also to understand the expansion or the expansion of the additional duties.
You want to talk about the new role?
I can't give you the exact stats pre-COVID and now, and we can provide that
Thank you.
after this hearing today. But what I can say is that our warrant apprehension unit within the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services is mainly responsible for parole and mandatory release warrants. And they also assist with our interstate compact warrants. So in order to help our partners within the city, they have taken on the responsibility of serving some of our high-risk probation violation warrants.
Got you. I appreciate that. Love to see those numbers.
We will get those.
Get
for you.
you. Madam Chair, for me. Madam Secretary, could you elaborate and provide us with information regarding your, we all deal with it. Actually, the entire state deals with it. The recruiting and your retention activity prior and since COVID as well. And lastly, Madam Chair, the submission of the supervisory victimization report.
So with the retention, what I will say is that we were able, especially with our drinking and driver monitors, we were able to be awarded the opportunity to introduce a new classification of 3, which did provide them an additional pathway to success and moving up within the department. That opportunity was a non-competitive opportunity, which allowed us to move approximately 40 individuals from the 2 to a 3, which helped us greatly with retention because many of them were looking at retirement opportunities and there were no additional movement for growth. So that has been substantial. We're also continuing with our retention efforts through the longevity program. And we've had many to sign on board with that to take that additional option. And then we continue to just try to use them now as ambassadors for each other. to encourage them that even if they're not staying within an agent or within a drunk driving, that there are other opportunities within public safety that they are still certainly qualified for. I think one of the things that largely helped our retention, especially with our drinking and drunk drivers, was the removal of the college degree requirement for them. Unfortunately, we were unable to do that for our agent just because of the critical need for that background and that education and that criminal justice background for them. But we'll continue to look to see where there are other options where we can kind of embrace that will allow individuals to stay and move into other paths there.
Thank you. So if I might, I want to thank you all for allowing us to work with you regarding that matter. I think it made a huge difference, or began to make a huge difference. And I think we're willing to work with you to find other ways so that we can retain our folks. The victimization supervisee report.
We'll have to get back to you on that, sir.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
I noticed that Jacob's taking copious notes.
Yeah.
So we will get this to you in writing as well,
Okay.
because
Thank
you can tell we're very interested in digging into the details on this. Senator Rosepep.
I wanted to double down on the vacancy and workforce issue across the agency.
Mhm.
Can you just summarize for us, what are the credential and training needs, requirements to be an agent, I guess is the best way to
For
describe
the
it?
parole and probation.
Parole and probation, yeah.
A parole and probation agent is required to have a bachelor's degree in a social science or criminal justice field. Once they are hired, they are required to be certified by the Maryland Police and Correctional Training Commission, and they enter an agent academy, and they're required to have 240 certified hours.
In training, classroom training.
Yes, and I think there is a week in the field, 2 weeks in the field that's part of that agent academy.
And who sets that whole requirement? Is that the department? Is that DBM? Is that some external something?
I will defer that question to Executive Director Al Liebno from the Training Commission.
It's the Correctional Training Commission, sir.
So you set those rules?
Not me as the agency, the Correctional Training Commission.
Okay, the commission, the commission sets those, they decide BA requirement in these fields.
Yes, sir.
They set the requirement, some number of hours of classroom training.
They set minimum number of hours and they set the objectives that have to be covered. And I will advise you, since I run that academy or see that academy, there are more objectives, more topics that are taught beyond what the commission requires that specifically addresses the needs of director of in the parole and probation field.
And you mentioned that there was some category where you eliminated the BA requirement.
The drinking driving monitor position is a high school diploma.
Gotcha. And what did it have before?
It had a high school diploma.
I'm sorry, I thought you changed the
No.
requirement.
Yeah.
No, that we misspoke on that, sir. It's a high school.
It's
diploma.
always been a high school diploma. And again, what's the training for that?
Again, they are certified by the Maryland Police and Correctional Training Center, but it's not 240 hours. It's 180 hours of certified classroom training and field.
Just a reaction here, and we've had discussions, and we're continuing to have discussions on this to try to help with your workforce problem. It strikes me just on the face of it, for the probation, very heavy on classroom and very light on observation. If it's 2 weeks in the field and 4 years of a BA and something generally in that area, and then X number of hours of specific training, it just seems like a kind of a weird mismatch between theory and reality. I just throw that out for thought. I'm not really asking for a response, but we welcome any thoughts on that now or later.
Fortunately, we have the Police and Correctional Training Commission up next, so I think we
Great,
should dig
exactly.
into this issue.
That's the way to do it.
in
Yeah,
about
we
10
do.
minutes.
That's a good idea. Okay, thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Salling.
Thank you. They hit all the questions, so they did a great job, by the way. But one thing that I like to always have an avenue is if there's something that's in here that we maybe have another question, what's a good avenue that we can get back to you? I think it's good to have more, not just a time of a hearing, but other times of communication that we can get back with you and you can get back with us. That's a good way to work together, as a good senator said.
Yes, sir. And Jennifer Beskid and Kathy Cole are our legislative analysts here. Please utilize them as you need, and they will get the information to us that you need so that we can answer.
Okay, I want to thank you. Ready? Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have a couple more questions. I appreciate the information you provided in the testimony about your recruitment efforts. And I'm going to ask you, Madam Secretary, this every budget you have in front of us. The governor has stated that he would like to cut vacancy rates across state government in half within a year. This division is sitting at around 16% vacancy rate. What is your personal goal for a year from now while we're all sitting here again? What would you like this vacancy rate to be? What goal should we hold you to?
I would say less than 10%.
Less than 10%. That's helpful.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And do you feel like you have the tools in your toolkit at the moment?
I feel that
achieve it.
we are still exploring them. We are gaining them. There are other avenues that I'm sure out there we haven't explored yet, but we will continue to look so that we can make just the best decision so that we can do proper recruitment and hiring.
Okay, we appreciate that. And then similar question on the caseload ratios, because I think that's another topic of concern that Jacob flagged for us. What are your goals in terms of lowering that caseload ratio?
So I think that we have to look at not so much as always lowering them,
Okay.
but ensuring that they're balanced. So to ensure that the agent does not have a caseload that is full of high-risk individuals, but they have a balance of low risk through high-risk individuals that will help them also balance their day-to-day operations and their workload. Some of the things that I know Ms. Danner has done is already set aside. Some of those high risks like domestic violence and sex offenders are specific to certain agents. They try to keep them at a minimum with certain agents. But if we look at the distribution and how we distribute those cases amongst those agents, that should help balance it as well.
So I'm learning this along with the budgets. So for my reading of this, I read it as you have certain parole and probation officers who have just high risk, just moderate, just low, but you're saying in reality, an agent would have a mix.
And in reality, I see them having some low that
Okay.
need less supervision, and then some on the higher end that need more constant supervision.
Okay.
And that way they're able to balance their load a little bit.
Okay. So what goal should we hold you to this time next year when it comes to caseload?
I would ask that you give me an opportunity to look at that.
Okay, I appreciate it. Luckily, you'll be back many times before us this year,
Give me
but
the opportunity.
we want to work with you on that. Okay, finally, back to the screening tool. And I think Senator Rosebud stated it adequately. You know, there's only so good the math and the tool could possibly be in the reality. At the same time, feels like there's a direct correlation between supervisees and a risk of being a victim or risk of being an offender. So collectively, we have failed at keeping people safe and keeping people who should be behind bars instead of in the street committing crimes. Is there human intervention or is it just this tool in terms of assigning low, moderate, or high risk?
There is human intervention. For example, we talked about a new gun charge and the individual being continued under supervision. The risk level for that individual is increased. So we do provide for overrides when necessary, but we want to make sure that we're doing it in an evidence-based way. Hence the revalidation studies of our risk needs instruments.
What can we do to help, or what more tools do you need to get that, like in this 54% numbers given me agita? So what do you need to get that more accurate or to make sure that folks under supervision are either not at risk? And I appreciate you disaggregating the data for us, so that's an important point here, either at risk of being a victim or at risk of being a perpetrator.
I think once the revalidation study is completed by George Mason University, that will help us get on the right path.
Okay.
And then if we need additional assistance, we would be happy to let you know.
Okay. And when is that study coming back?
It is in the works right now.
Okay. Okay. And if you do get it back during the interim, please feel free to share, and perhaps we might want to put that in, that we would like to receive that as soon as you get it.
Absolutely.
Okay. Senator Rosebud.
Thank you. Again, following up on the chair's comment about the assignment of agents to high risk, moderate risk, and low risk. I assumed exactly what the chair assumed, that you had specialists in high risk. And at one level, I can see someone might, not want the toughest cases and have some of the easier cases, but it would strike me the skill sets would be different. I'm sort of missing the concept of not having specialists who just have a small caseload and concentrate on the high-risk folks. Well, what's the theory behind spreading it out?
We do have specialized caseloads where the numbers call for that. But for example, Maryland is rural, suburban, and urban.
Yep.
So you might have fewer sex offenders in a rural area. So you would have a mixed caseload. Our common agents, they are the ones that supervise sex offenders. They are specially trained, but all agents are pretty much cross-trained in supervising individuals, regardless of their risk and their needs. But where we can, we do have concentrated caseloads based on high risk. Where we can't, we have an appropriate mix.
Well, I mean, I presume like the entire population of Maryland, most of the folks being supervised are in the Baltimore-Washington corridor. I'm sure there are people in Western Maryland, Southern Maryland, Eastern Shore who are being supervised, but the numbers must be heavily in the Baltimore-Washington corridor, I presume.
They are higher in the Baltimore metro area, but our caseload averages are lower in that area if you look on the chart.
Right.
And then it's followed by other jurisdictions, but I can get the numbers for you.
I'm really just raising the question. Again, you don't need to answer today. It would strike me, not having done any of this kind of work, that some people would be really good at dealing with high risk supervisees, and some people would be really pretty bad at dealing with high risk supervisees. And it would seem like it'd be a kind of a specialization, a skill set, and a personality. And I'm just curious. So that's why I'm just curious as to why isn't what the chair and I assumed it was, that it was more special. Well, maybe if you show what the specialization, show us the data on what specialization there is, if there are any folks who specialize in the high risk.
There absolutely is. We have our specialized sex offender agents that run the COMET program. That's where they supervise all the sex offenders. But in some jurisdictions where you might have 5 sex offenders or 10 sex
I
offenders,
understand.
that's a mixed caseload, but they're all specially trained.
Right. I get that one example. Well, what percentage of your supervisees are sex offenders? I have no idea.
I'll have to get back to you on that,
Okay.
sir.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. We will get you our list of questions. We appreciate your partnership here. And we're, like I said at the beginning, we're in this together. So
Thank you so much.
And if I may add, if you go to our departmental website, there is a public safety dashboard and you can gather information on DPP on that.
it's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Okay, we have a number of members of the public signed up to testify. I have Kesha King, Nicole Brown, Sinead Jones, the first 3. And we have 2 at a time. In whichever order you would like.
Thank you.
And just a reminder, we have a 3-minute rule.
Okay.
Thank you.
Greetings, committee members. My name is Keisha King. I'm a dedicated union member in ASME Local 3661 for the Division of Parole and Probation, where I serve as an executive board member and a shop steward. I'm a hardworking, dedicated public servant who works diligently serving our community, working as a parole and probation agent, and am doing my level best to maintain the tenets of public safety. However, fellow colleagues and myself are finding it difficult to keep Marylanders safe due to the Division of Parole and Probation staffing crisis, which is counterintuitive to maintaining public safety. Currently, agent and monitors work outside of their classification due to the staffing crisis, but are expected to work at peak performance. To be more specific, not only are agents and monitors managing caseloads as high as 300+ cases, they are expected to function as intake worker, office professional, and are dedicating at least 36 hours per week to duties outside of their classification. Not only are agents not compensated for the additional workload, they are expected to maintain and meet the contact standards as outlined in policy to manage their cases. We are in the bowels of this crisis because of management's failure to get ahead of a large exodus of retirees. their failure to leave the DDMP monitor and agent positions open and continuous. But more importantly, and most critically, the agency fails to understand the importance of providing not just a living wage, but a wage that will allow state workers to thrive and not barely survive. To that point, it is commonly known across this agency that most state workers are forced to work 2 or 3 jobs in order to stay afloat in one of the wealthiest states in this country. I myself face eviction month after month because I am forced to rob Peter to pay Paul because wage increases for almost a decade were denied, causing salaries to lag behind the national average and have failed to keep up with inflation. Shame on this agency for having homeless state employees. We need your support to restructure the DPP pay scale, ensure that state workers receive annual steps and COLAs, and to ensure management is working diligently and vehemently to fill the egregiously appalling vacancies across this agency. And I submit to this committee that we, as agents and drinking driving monitors, have Senate Bill 803. I was instrumental in having that bill passed for the classification, the senior level position for drinking driving monitors. And that was something that they needed because forever there was no upward trajectory for those positions. But I think the retention issue and the hiring issue for this agency is directly related to salary. The salary is too low for agents and monitors alike. And so that has been a direct impact and effect on hiring. There has been more agent academies than there has been DDMP monitor. I'm a former DDMP monitor, so I speak from experience from that classification and now on the agent side. So we need your support.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, you're on. Yep.
Oh, sorry. Good afternoon. My name is Nicole Brown, and I am a proud member of AFSCME Local 3661 Parole and Probation. I have dedicated 23 years to serving as an office professional for the Division of Parole and Probation. I am here today to tell the untold stories of the office professionals working hard to keep Maryland safe. After 23 years, I'm so sorry.
This is an important issue. We appreciate your candor.
I'm making less than $38,000 a year. I'm making $38,000, and which is my rent is 31% of my yearly salary. I'm just trying to make ends meet. I don't know what is important to anyone else, but a living wage where I'm not struggling is very important to myself and others. I'm not here just for myself. I'm here for everyone else that's going through the same thing that I am. And I'm just asking for a living wage so that I'm not trying to hope. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. This is my first time.
You're doing a great job.
Thank you.
After 23 years, I make less than $38,000 a year, which in this economy is considered poverty wages. It is essential the state restructure the salary scale so that my salary matches the cost to live in Maryland. As of right now, I pay $1,248 a year in rent, which is over 31% of my current salary. How am I expected to live? We need yearly steps and COLAs so that our salary can continue to increase at a rate consistent with the cost of living in Maryland. Maybe then I can go on an actual vacation and practice self-care. It's not just about pay, it's also about fair practices. We need to be treated as the professionals that we are and have a promotional track that allows us to grow as our skills and knowledge grow. For the past 23 years, my job title has been Office Secretary 1. My job title remains the same while my duties continue to increase. We deserve the opportunity to climb a career ladder as Office Secretary 1. Every day, office professionals show up and do their part in keeping Maryland safe. I am here today because it's the state's turn to do its part and invest in the hardworking men and women who are continuously neglected and left behind and treated as third-class employees.
Thank you very much to you both.
Do you have any questions?
And I apologize, Ms. King, for mispronouncing your first name.
Oh, that's fine.
What is your job title currently?
I'm at Parole and Probation Agent 1.
Agent 1. Okay.
Yes.
Understood. Thank you. And I'd be remiss, both my parents were probation officers, so I
nice.
come from a household that I just went from a personal level. Please, thank you.
Thank you.
Know how
Thank
much we
you.
appreciate you. Any other questions from the
Any
committee?
questions?
Senator?
And you probably don't, but if you do, I'd love,
Sure.
what percentage of your coworkers have second jobs, as you were describing?
If I had to describe it, I'd say at least 25-30% of them have second and third jobs.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Senator Jackson?
It's a quick question.
Yes.
Do we have the written testimonies of the civilian, of the community?
I don't have it in front of me. Do we have it? Was it submitted
Yeah.
in advance? Okay, and if not,
If not, I can make
We'd
sure.
like
that
to make
you-
sure we get.
Okay.
okay.
But
Would you mind submitting written testimony for the record? We'd appreciate that. Denise,
Thank
thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
While the next witness comes up, I have a question for Jacob. Do we know the last time there's been an analysis of salary structure?
Not for parole and probation agents. I know the correctional officer one just got a new scale about 2 or 3 years ago.
Could you,
But there were the grade increases for the entry level one, step increases, but it wasn't a full grade increase.
I'd be curious that when the last
Yeah.
time that was conducted by DBM. I think that's a opportunity for exploration here. Okay, thank you. Please.
Good afternoon. My name is Shanae Jones, and I'm a shop steward for ASME Local 3661, the Maryland Parole Commission. I work for the commission's warrant unit. The Parole Commission is much more than the commissioners that decide if inmates should be released. It includes an entire department of office professionals who complete vital tasks such as entering warrants, scheduling parole hearings, typing parole orders, and many other functions essential to maintaining public safety. In 2022, the Parole Commission had 19 vacant office professional positions. They believe filling those positions will solve the staffing crisis. I am here to tell you that hiring more staff only puts a Band-Aid on a wound that continues to grow. If you truly want to fix the problem, you should invest in the employees who invest in public safety. I am asking that you restructure the pay scale so that there are no employees bringing home poverty wages, or employees will continue to leave state services to seek positions at companies like Target, where they can make up to $80,736 a year working as a food beverage team leader. We have new staff coming in off the street, making more than our vested employees. I've worked for the Parole Commission for 21 years, and I make $47,020 a year. And me and my daughter Kiara are forced to live at home with my parents. I work for one of the richest states in the country, where the median income is $69,266, according to Maryland at a Glance. Essentially, I work for a state that I cannot afford to live in.
Thank you for your testimony and your public service.
Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you all very much for being here.
Thank you.
Okay. With that, we conclude the portion on community supervision. We'll move on to DPSCS, Police and Correctional Training Commissions. Again, Jacob is our analyst. And we've already teed up a number of questions. So Jacob.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Police and Correctional Training Commissions is the smallest functional unit of the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. It receives a 2024 budget allowance of $11.7 million, which is about a 2.6% increase. The budget allowance is broken down in Exhibit 1, and I'll highlight the $2 million in the Maryland Police Training Standards Commission Police Training Fund, which is dedicated funds that I will be going into the use of in just a moment. The overall budget change is about $300,000. There's some position transfers out of this unit just to realign departmental operational needs. That costs about a drop of $300,000. And the only really major increase is new rental costs. This is regarding an agreement the department is entering with the University of Baltimore for dedicated classroom space for their in-service training. It would also include parking spaces there for their staff to be able to access it easily. It's expected to reduce the amount of travel costs that they are currently incurring for Baltimore City officers, to be trained in Jessup. Exhibit 3 shows the vacancies, and they averaged at about 9.5 vacancies over the past year. And it's been pretty standard for PCTC. So going into the police training fund spending, Exhibit 4 shows the expected spending rates through the end of 2024. Now you can see that the fund balance grows every year and that $2 million is added every year. And by 2024, we'd expect that balance to grow to almost $12 million. There are plans to spend $10.5 million specifically for the learning management system replacement, which is a major IT project. The project has had several delays, and that caused the department to cancel most of the funds that have been appropriated from the MPTSC fund over the past several years. They are expecting to have the solicitation reissued in the current fiscal quarter so that they could make an award in the next year. However, this has been at least a full year behind schedule. I will also point out that while $10.5 million is a current estimate, that doesn't match what's in the budget in Appendix N, which shows the cost of major IT projects, which only lists $2 million, which has been the previous amount estimated for the cost of this project. But it seems that that was most likely just the entry level amount to get negotiations going with potential vendors. And now that there is more information on what potential vendors would be interested in, the estimated cost is over $10 million. They would have about $500,000 in annual maintenance costs as well, which would be funded through the MPTSC fund. But overall, as these plans can show you, there hasn't been much use and much spending of this fund, and it's $2 million every year that's dedicated. And while it is growing a little bit of interest every year, which is beneficial, but it would be even more beneficial to use the funding on necessary operations. The only other performance evaluation that we'll be going over for PCTC is the use of the Public Safety Education and Training Center, or PSETC, which is located in Sykesville, and that's the primary location that employees are trained in for the department. The amount of DPSCS specific employee trainings have decreased in 2022, but that's mostly because in 2021, there was a backlog of entry-level training academies that they were working through from delays during COVID. So in 2022, it went back down to more normal levels. And Exhibit 6 shows the classroom utilization rates of the different types of classrooms that they have at PSETC. I would point out that labs and simulators are decreasing in usage, and there are more plans to increase the number of simulators that PCTC has. And while that's beneficial and it's surely something that could improve training in some areas, it would still, they're not going to be getting the benefit if people aren't using them. So that's something the department can look to encourage the use of the number of simulators and labs that they have at PCTC. There is an appendix that shows some more details of the major IT project that I mentioned. However, that's all I have for this presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Jacob. I do have a number of questions. Do we have, and apologies if I missed it in the analysis, the number of law enforcement officers and correction officers who actually go through the training every year?
I don't think that the MFR breaks it down that way, but that's something that we could get from the department.
Thank you. And I'm particularly curious about this learning management system replacement. But let me start with maybe the legislative intent. I was not here of the fund itself. And let's kind of back up from there.
So the fund was established to provide a dedicated pool of resources that could be used at the discretion of the Police Training and Standards Commission to broadly enhance the delivery of services. And that could be in any number of ways. It could do even capital improvements to the physical location, which has been considered. For instance, they have a driver training course, which is frequently overbooked, and they've even had issues with it being closed for renovations for over a year in the past, or at least a portion of that skid track. So in theory, this pool of resources could build until they reach a point for a project the size and scope to enhance training. But as I pointed out, it hasn't necessarily been utilized so far.
Okay, that's helpful. Can you talk a little bit more about the IT development project and how that aligns here?
Right. So there's a learning management system that tracks every aspect of PCTC's entry-level training academies, the certification of officers, and it tracks information on teachers as well as even special educators that they come to train at events. So this whole learning management system is pretty outdated, and it's over 30 years old now, I believe, at this point. And it's pretty limited for reporting. So we've tried to get more information in the past on some of the specific classes that they're utilizing and how many participants they have. But it hasn't been as easy to track that and to report on those individual officers. But in the future, with this learning management system, we're hoping that they'd basically be able to respond to the General Assembly a lot more easily for some of the information requests and specifically about increasing the quality of police training.
Okay, all for the low cost of $10.5 million. Okay. Seeing a lot of lights. Senator Jackson.
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. I just wanted to comment on the fund. So if you venture back to the Justice Reinvestment Act beginning in 2016, and when we got to the point where we established and we separated the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission from the original Maryland Police Training and Correctional, so we wanted to make sure that they had funding that was associated there. What we saw over the years was that the original concept was funded by funds that came from funds that came from the ticketing or citations in the state. And we found over the years that they weren't necessarily being realized at the training center. So we wanted to make sure that this particular the Police and Training Standards Commission would have a source of fund, a source of revenue. And that's where the 2 million came in per year. So we put that in a couple of years ago. So
that's helpful. Senator Rosepep.
Yeah, that is helpful. Thank you, Senator. I want to understand a little bit better. So this fund It says it's paid through special court fees. What special court fees?
Those are what Senator Jackson was just referencing with the ticket fees. There's a few specific ones.
Citations, I mean, when you show up in court, there are court fees associated with cases when you go to court, and there are specific fees that were used to go to the Training and Standards Commission.
But lots of people show up in court. I mean, are these in criminal cases, civil cases?
Primarily the citations,
Citation, again, you're the expert on law. Citations means
traffic citations.
traffic citations.
And other matters, and the executive director will be able to explain more in depth, but
Okay.
so we wanted to make sure, again, when the Training and Standards Commission, or I'm sorry, the Police and Correctional Training Commission was created, it was stood up by court fees. And there were those dedicated court fees. But when we broke that out when we changed the name of the Training and Police and Correctional Training Commission, and we created the Police Standards Commission, we need to make sure that they had a source of income.
Gotcha. No, that makes perfect sense. I'm all on board with it. Maybe when the director can come up, he can explain a little bit more about the specifics. That'd be great. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for the analyst? Senator Selling.
Going back to the classroom utilization and talking about the PCTC and the PSETC, and the numbers look like they're all over the place at times, but I know the COVID date there, but there is, like, you can go and just look at the state agencies and see how low they are compared, but I'm just wondering what type of, you were saying there are state agencies, local, federal, and private agencies. And these are all plural. And also we know who the DPSCS is training. Well, what other departments are they that do the training?
So that's a good question. It's primarily of the state agencies, Department of Natural Resources Police, and the Maryland State Police. For the local, federal, and private agencies, so as I mentioned, there is the driver training track, and there's other resources that other locals don't have at their academies or easily available that they use at PCTC. They can also come for a variety of special trainings, advanced trainings, and one-time events that sometimes those are just put on by federal agencies for federal agencies. Sometimes those are put on by an independent organization for whoever wants to show up. But those are some of the examples of what makes up that red line there.
So like a private or independent or groups that have been the federal, got all different types also. So
Okay. Exactly.
Thank you, Senator Selling. Okay, so seeing no further questions for Jacob, we have again Acting Secretary Scruggs and whoever you'd like to bring up with you. Whenever you are ready.
Good afternoon again, Chair Alfred and members of the Senate Public Safety, Transportation and Environment Subcommittee. For the record, again, my name is Carolyn J. Scruggs, and I'm the Acting Secretary of the Maryland Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. With me today is Naja Roberts, the department's Chief Financial Officer, and Christina Lentz, Acting Deputy Secretary of Administration, who are available to answer questions. I'm also joined by Executive Director Al Liebno, who oversees the operations of the Public Safety Education and Training Center, to include the certification unit and police and correctional training units that support both the police training and standards and correctional training commissions, and Executive Director of the Police Training and Standards Commission, Wayne Silver. In my capacity as Secretary, I am the Chair of the Correctional Training Commission. While the commissions are quasi-independent, the department shares staff and supports each commission with finance, procurement, human resources, and IT. The department, as well as both commissions, appreciate the ongoing collaboration with the Department of Legislative Services, and we appreciate again Mr. Cash's hard work and his thoughtful analysis. With regard to the analysis, there was one issue that DLS asked us to comment on, which is to expand on our vision and plans to expand MPTSC funds, resources, and enhance police training programs, as well as address the delays and the cost increases for the learning management system. To be clear, statutorily, it is up to the members of the commission to determine how to spend the funds. Executive Director Liebno and Silver are here to answer questions about the fund. However, before I turn this over, I would like to say to the department agrees with the recommended action, which is to concur with the governor's allowance. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Executive Director Liebno.
Okay, good afternoon, Chair Elford and members of the Public Safety Transportation Environment Subcommittee. And thank you, Secretary Scruggs. As stated in the analysis, the Police Training Standards Commission had utilized the fund to enhance police training in accordance with several legislative mandates implemented in the previous 2 years. In FY23, funds were used to support training that was and is continuing today to conduct for newly established administrative charging committees across the state. In addition, a significant amount, if not all of the remaining balance, will be utilized for implementation and subsequent maintenance of the new learning management system. Although it appears that the fund has been underutilized, procurements for the 2 largest expenditures for the fund are in the final stages of approval, and the funds are expected to be incurred in FY23. The first one, the driver training simulator, will cost almost $500,000. And the department expects to have the award before the Board of Public Works by April or May of this year, 2023. Moreover, the department anticipates presenting recommended LMS award to the Board of Public Works in May of 2023. Also, as stated earlier, the LMS procurement is likely to consume a majority, if not all, of the current funds. In summary, the current planned strategic use of the fund is for maintaining and enhancing the LMS following the initial purchase. The fund will also continue to be utilized to enhance training initiatives for various administrative charging committees across Maryland and expand and enhance numerous police training programs related to use of force, de-escalation, community engagement, and specialized assignments. Finally, it is projected the fund will also provide an opportunity to purchase additional virtual training simulators. The purchase of these systems will expand training opportunities for increasing the availability of training in regional locations in the various regions of the state of Maryland. So we do have a vision, and we'll continue to work with the department on utilizing the funds to make these training enhancements. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Rispat.
Yeah, so back to my earlier question. So exactly where do these funds come from?
These funds come from, and it goes back, and Senator Jackson had to step out. And my history evolves over a long time in public safety in Maryland, almost 49 years.
Don't brag.
Initially in the late 80s, the legislature enacted, and don't hold me to this title, a public safety fund. At that point, it was a $5 increase in administrative cost for district court cases. And I don't recall whether it was just traffic or all district court cases. That $5 fee went into a special fund that was directed towards the development, construction, and implementation of the wonderful training center that I oversee in Sykesville. In the early 2000s, those funds were redirected and taken away from a direct input to the Public Safety Training Center in Sykesville. I'm assuming because the center had opened up and had begun its operations. And then Senator Jackson in 2015, 2016 put in this bill that ultimately resulted in the Police Training and Standards. It was a Police Training Commission at that point. In 2016, the name changed, same operation, but the name changed to the Police Training and Standards Commission. Okay, that those $2 million a year go into a fund at their discretion for continuing police training and enhancement of police training.
I get the usage, and I'm trying to understand where that comes from. So it's basically traffic tickets, or it's other things too, or do you know?
That's my understanding. It's some function within the district court, sir. I don't know how it's broken down.
Okay, maybe the staff could pursue this. And let me take a minute or two to pursue this. I was involved back when I was in the House in the 90s in upping court fees in all kinds of ways to provide public services. I'm a big proponent of that. I don't want I don't want that to be ridiculous, but on the other hand, at that, back 30 years ago, they were very, very low. And it seems to me a good source of revenue. And that's why I'm trying to understand, because I didn't know about this specific thing. And the other question, I guess, would be a historical thing that maybe Senator Jackson knows the answer to, is why is it 2 million instead of 1 million instead of 3 million?
That would have to come from Senator Jackson.
Okay, all right. But I think pursuing that, and then what happens to the rest of the court fees these days? To what extent are the other court fees dedicated? Because I think particularly in the public safety area, it's a tremendous opportunity that we should be looking at kind of strategically in terms of court fees of all kinds. And that includes citations, I guess, traffic tickets, criminal court situations, and civil court situations. So I just sort of like to put that on our agenda, Madam Chair. I also want, thank you. I also want to come back to the question I was raising about the education and training of parole officers, the question that I asked earlier.
Regarding the difference between a monitor and an agent?
No, I'm not sophisticated enough to understand that difference.
Okay.
I'm really asking, I was asking the question about what are the credentials and training? And as I understood it, I guess is it the same for parole and probation officers, or is there a difference?
No, it's different.
Okay, so what is it for each?
Okay, under the Correctional Training Commission, they have the responsibility to set regulations for correctional officers, parole and probation agents,
Right.
alcohol monitors, and juvenile services.
Everybody.
Everybody.
I got you.
Dealing with corrections. Yes, sir. There's been a task analysis study that was done a year ago. That's the latest task analysis. There was one done many years ago that develops what we refer to as training objectives, which is the content of the training arena that each respective discipline has to have.
Yep.
And they differ in each.
Sure, I got that.
And then they also established a minimum length of training. You did mention earlier that you were a little concerned about the 2 weeks versus the so much time spent in the classroom.
Yep.
Okay, the time they spend in the classroom, yeah, some of that is theory, but a lot of that is practical exercises that they go through to develop the skills necessary to analyze the interpretations they have to conclude, the decisions they have to make dealing with offenders, individuals under their monitoring, and also the processes they have to use to get that.
And that makes sense to me. I was more concerned about the 4 years of undergraduate college that are not focused on being a probation or parole officer, that is generally in the social sciences, the way it was discussed.
That has been, I will tell you, sir, I do not know the history behind it, but it has been in that regulation since I became deputy director in 2009.
But that standard is set by the commission.
That is set by the commission. Yes, sir.
I would actually like it, because this is a very important area. I would like it if you all could get back to us on what the rationale is, if any, for that. It strikes me as kind of illogical in the sense of, if you've got 4 years of undergraduate and you've got however many hours in the classroom with the training where you're very focused on doing that, and then you have 2 weeks actually in the field, it strikes me as like totally reversed from reality. It would seem like you'd want a lot in the field, actually dealing with real people and under the supervision of an experienced parole and probation officer, and a lot less stuff in the classroom unrelated to doing the job. So I'd love to understand the thinking around that.
We'll be happy to do that, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. I have no doubt that the new IT system is mission critical, especially since the current one is 30 years old, which I think is about the standard across state government at this point. Can you talk to us a little bit, and not just about its value? I appreciate data collection, but what other efficiencies or what other value will the state get for this IT upgrade?
Yes, ma'am. The new system will allow the collection of more data that we're doing right now. Many legislative mandates, as you're aware of, have been provided over the last 4, 5, 6 years for data collection. Also, it will allow the respective agencies to have direct access to the database. Right now, they don't.
Okay.
They have to call my staff, who brings up a record and then provides them any responses they want. Also, with the new technology that's out there, the IT technology, I'm very, very hopeful. Just knowing what technology is approved in other areas, this will be a tremendous asset to my staff and also to the legislature, like Mr. Cash mentioned. Not only will we be able to give you more timely reports, we'll be able to give you more in-depth reports. on the data that we're storing in there. Because we store records on currently certified 16,000 police officers. And I can't tell you how many folks like myself that was a former retired police officer that's still in the database as an instructor. And then we maintain records at least 5 years past the last entry, as historical. And then that's just on the police side. Then we got another 12,000 for active correctional officers across the state, and the same thing for the other arenas within the correctional field. So this will be a tremendous boost for us. Not only the platform itself with current technology and operating system, as far as the data input is going to be much more streamlined. In addition to getting data out to the client by the client agencies, they'll be able to put data directly into the system, because it'll be a cloud-based system. Where now they have to send the data to my staff uploads it, downloads it to get it in the current system.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Any further questions? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much, Madam Secretary.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, looks like we can move on to the final act, Department of Juvenile Services. And we have Madeline, our analyst. Take it away, Madeline. Take a moment to share my screen. All right, thank you, Senator. My name is Madeline, and today I'm presenting the DLS analysis for the Department of Juvenile Services. The fiscal 24 budget increases $13.8 million to $322.4 million. Most of that growth is attributable to salary enhancements. DJS is tasked with supervising and treating youth involved in Maryland's juvenile justice system. The department oversees youth from the point of referral through the education process to reentry into society. The first portion of my analysis will describe the population served. Typically, this would include juvenile arrest data. However, the Department of State Police has yet to publish the 2021 Uniform Crime Report data. Arrests are one way that youth become involved with DJS. Exhibit 1 shows complaints received by DJS and their dispositions, including formal cases, which are those which require court intervention. Though DJS received nearly 52% more complaints in fiscal 22 compared with fiscal 21, the number of complaints was still almost 28% lower than in fiscal 20. So it shows that since the decline that's been associated with the pandemic, the population has not recovered, and overall the trend that was existed in the previous decade really stays going down. Cases that are handled informally are monitored as part of the non-residential caseload, along with youth on probation or the youth who are receiving aftercare programming. Non-residential population trends are shown in Exhibit 2. Consistent with the overall decline in complaints, the department's non-residential caseload trends have similarly declined over the last decade. Probation and aftercare cases are projected to be historically low in fiscal 23, consistent with efforts to keep youth from becoming court involved. Let's go to Exhibit 4. Exhibit 4 shows population trends for the department's detained population, those children who are waiting for their court date, waiting to be placed in a committed facility, and those youth who are adult court authorized. Due to 3 factors, complaints rising in fiscal 22, complaints projected to increase in fiscal 23, and the courts having been fully operational during fiscal 2023, the average daily population, or ADP, has risen to 205 in fiscal 23 year-to-date data. I'll also note with this exhibit that the adult court authorized population now accounts for over 61% of the population, the 3rd year in a row that is made up over half of the detained population for the department. State-run committed residential facilities
do not provide adequate capacity to accommodate the number of youths requiring out-of-home placements, nor do they provide the full complement of programming required to address the variety of treatment needs for the committed population. These committed residential average daily populations are shown in Exhibit 6 on this page. To that end, DJS contracts with private in-state and out-of-state vendors to provide services to committed youth. Consistent with overall DJS population trends, the committed residential ADP continued to decline in fiscal 20 and 21. The committed ADP declined further by about 9.3% between fiscal 21 and fiscal 22. The fiscal 23 year-to-date data suggests that average daily population will continue to drop another 2%. Following committed placement, DJS continues to interact with its youth. After the court has been involved in the community for 30 days, a DJS entry specialist follows up with the youth and family to assure that the youth has accessed all needed services. The outcomes of these follow-up visits are documented and reported to the department as shown in Exhibit 7. Compared with fiscal 2017, which is the first year of available data, only 2 measures were improved in fiscal 22. While overall these measures detail efforts to better ease the youth's transition back into their community, DJS's recidivism measures provide greater detail and greater understanding for how many youths return to the juvenile justice system. This is shown in Exhibit 8. The decline of the rearrest rate suggests that policing practices are beginning to rearrest youth at a slower rate, while the decline in the readjudication and recommitment rates suggest that the juvenile justice system has been effective in reducing youth involvement in the judicial system. Though the rearrest rate for the 2019 cohort rose compared with the 2018 cohort, the declines in the 2-year recidivism metrics extending to the 3-year recidivism measures is a positive indicator that fewer youth are returning to the juvenile justice system. I'll now turn to the budget discussion, which is shown in Exhibit 9. DJS receives $322.4 million in the allowance, approximately 73% of which supports personnel expenses. With about 2,200 regular positions, DJS is one of the largest agencies in the executive branch. Youth programming, which is shown in yellow, accounts for approximately 10% of the fiscal 24 allowance. As discussed a little bit later, the costs for this youth programming fluctuate according to the department's population trends, and changes to the department's budgets are primarily driven by changes in youth programming expenditures and due to salary amounts. The remaining funds are allocated toward operating expenses, miscellaneous contractual services, and supplies and equipment related expenses. Exhibit 10, which starts here, shows that the change that occurs between fiscal 23 and fiscal 24, which nets about $13.8 million in increase. The personnel expenses alone increased the budget by about $8.4 million, and specific personnel actions are detailed here in the where it goes. That includes reclassification for resident advisor positions and a bonus for all resident advisor positions hired after November 15th, 2022, as well as the annualization of the November 22 4.5% cost of living increase. Scrolling a bit down. Various IT projects add $4.6 million and utilities add $1.3 million to the department's budget. Growth is offset by a reduction in per diem costs and for the removal of grant funds. And those are shown on the top of the next page. Funding for ROCA Baltimore is currently mandated at $2 million per year. However, an additional $1 million was provided in fiscal 23 through supplemental budget number 5 of 2022 to extend programming to outside of the Baltimore City jurisdiction. For more information about DJS and ROCA's activities in the interim, please see the update section of the analysis. This $1 million decline is just the removal of the additional funds. The mandate continues to be provided for in fiscal 24. And I'll discuss a few of the changes I mentioned earlier in a little more detail. So the department's case management system, which is known as ASSIST, is being replaced in fiscal 23 by the Child, Juvenile, and Adult Management System. Implementation of CJAMS will allow DJS to participate in the Maryland Total Human Services Integrated Network, which is abbreviated as MD-THINK. along with other state agencies. While MD Think is considered a major IT project, it's not budgeted like within the Department of Juvenile Services. So there are costs associated with joining, but you don't see in an appendix an explanation of overall costs for MD Think. DLS is asking that DJS comment on the startup and ongoing costs associated with CJAMs and joining MD Think. DJS should also comment in its testimony today on how these projects will allow the department to better manage its population and how joining MD Think will improve interactions with health and human services providers in the state. Exhibit 11 compares the committed residential average daily population with per diem funding in recent fiscal years. As the per diem population has continued to drop, the department's funding for per diem programming accordingly declined through fiscal 22. Per diem funding decreases by 16.4% in fiscal 24, bringing that down to 17.1 million, which is closer in line with fiscal 2022 expenditures. Given the continued decline in the population and the lower funding level in the analysis, it's possible that the working appropriation might overstate the amount that will be needed in fiscal 23 by roughly $2 million. I'll now discuss changes to the department's personnel, and this will also lead me into the discussion of my first issue. Though there's no change in the number of regular positions between fiscal 23 and fiscal 24, there are notable salary actions, and DJS also removes a net of 20.5 contractual positions, including 22.5 residential advisor trainees from the Facilities Operations Administration and Support Program. Personnel expenses increased by approximately 8.4 million, as was shown in the WIG or Where It Goes exhibit, after accounting for the annualization of the November 22 COLA. Position reclassifications add $3.6 million to the allowance and are the result of an agreement between the state and the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. The department's overtime allowance also increases by 1.3 million, which brings funding approximately in line with the fiscal 22 actual spending for that particular expense. Additionally, the allowance assumes a turnover rate of about 6%, it's 5.93, despite much higher vacancies in order to give the department flexibility in hiring. I'll note that the document currently says 5%, however, it is 6%, and that will be a correction that is made later to the document. At the close of calendar 2022, 16.3% of the department's total positions were vacant. High vacancy rates, particularly among a facility direct care employees, resulted in increased overtime expenses and can cause further issues for the department. And so Exhibit 12 shows the vacancy rate specifically for community direct care staff, as well as her residential direct care staff since June 2018. Moving then to this page, DLS estimates that staff vacancies within DJS may result in a fiscal 23 surplus like there was in fiscal 2022. The fiscal 22 closeout analysis is provided in Appendix 2. DJS reverted approximately $15.6 million to the general fund, most of which, $12.6 million, came from unused funding that would have supported regular and contractual personnel. Having some excess general funds in the DJS budget allows DJS to properly fund an item at the end of the fiscal year and to align the budget as it needs to based on the changing population and as the facilities specific facilities may open or close. However, the discrepancy can also present an unrealistic working appropriation. At the start of fiscal 23, 173 positions were added in association with the assumption of the Juvenile Services Education Program, and that also came with a number of vacancies. Exhibit 13 shows the departmental vacancy rate for fiscal 21 through 23. Since the start of fiscal 23, the vacancy rate has grown 9.3 percentage points with an average vacancy rate of 7.3%, 12.2%, and 15.7% in fiscal 21, fiscal 22, and fiscal 23 year to date, respectively. Accordingly, the department's turnover rate is budgeted, well, not accordingly, excuse me. The department's turnover rate is currently budgeted at about 6%, as I mentioned previously, in order to encourage hiring. And this is not in line with the vacancy rates that the department has actually experienced. Assuming that DJS can hire enough positions by the end of the fiscal year to bring the fiscal 23 vacancies down to their average fiscal 2022 level, so before the assumption of the Juvenile Services Education Board, DLS estimates that DJS would need approximately $205.4 million for its regular positions. The working appropriation currently contains about $219 million for that purpose, which represents an over budgeting of about $13.6 million. My second issue is that DJS receives no capital funding in the fiscal 2024 budget. The fiscal 23 capital improvement program had planned to fund 2 projects, which include the Cheltenham Youth Treatment Center, or CYTC, and the Cheltenham Youth Detention Center addition for females, which I'll refer to as the CYDC project. The CYDC's project would help to consolidate the female detention services that are provided in the state. Both the CYDC and CYTC projects remain in the design phase, however, resulting in delays for the need of construction funds. The 2024 CIP shifts that funding to some of the out years. The department's plan for housing female youth has evolved over time. The CYTC was previously going to be a detention center for female youth only, and it was also previously going to be located at a different site. So as the needs of the department have changed and as the female population of the department's youth have changed, there have been efforts to plan for the future strategically. In November 21, DJS announced a major facility realignment plan. Part of this plan involved adding the new detention wing at the CYDC to open in fiscal 25 and the closing of the Noyes Center in the same year. The plan also included the closure of Waxter in January 22, although that date was ultimately pushed back to March 2022. One of the ways that the department has addressed its vacancy issues during the fall of 2022 was by to temporarily close Noyes and shift the population there to the CYDC, which is currently a 72-bed facility for male youth. When the temporary facility closure began, it was the department's intention to reopen Noyes sometime in January 23. The department reports that it has not yet done so. And I'll note that this is only possible due to the low number of female youth who are currently require detention housing. DLS is asking that the department comment on its plans to reopen the Noyes facility for female youth and whether other temporary facility closures are planned to accommodate the department's staffing needs or for any other reason. DJS would also comment on if there have been any modifications to the facility realignment plan or to the scope of those projects, particularly those relevant to female youth, other than, of course, the shifting of funds in the 2024 CIP. My final issue relates to the Baltimore City Strategic Partnership. Together with the Baltimore City Mayor's Office, the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office, and the Baltimore City Police Department, this partnership was meant to align and coordinate case management resources to more effectively and appropriately intervene in youth juvenile cases within the city. The fiscal 23 budget, the Budget Committee has withheld $500,000 for a report to be submitted by December 31st, 2022. DJS reports that collaborative efforts continue, but that they are no longer done and really haven't ever been able to be done through a formal partnership. The stakeholders have continued several strategic actions, however, to reduce youth violence, and those are detailed on pages 28 and 29, including the expansion of the DJS Police Liaison Unit, use of the Sidestep Pre-Arrest Diversion Program, establishing an emerging adult unit in Baltimore City, as well as warrant apprehension and intervention strategies and curfew visits. The report includes data from fiscal 2015 through 2022 to demonstrate how measures typically reported by DJS have changed for youth in Baltimore City. Performance actions specific to the strategic actions are not provided, although that would be difficult to do given that DJS is the one who is primarily driving the reporting for this initiative. Overall, complaints for Baltimore City youth fell by 77.9% from fiscal 15 to 2022. And a higher proportion of complaints come from the adult court transfers in fiscal 22 than any previous year. I'll also note, though, that the effects of this partnership and the impacts of COVID-19 are very difficult to distinguish. And the COVID-19 pandemic likely did have an impact on caseloads as well. With its submission of the Baltimore City Strategic Partnership Report, DJS provided the information requested, and DLS therefore recommends the release of those funds. DLS concurs with the governor's allowance, and this concludes my presentation. I would be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. On behalf of Senator Rosapep, before he went to his bill hearing, he asked me to drill down a little bit on page 15, the rearrest rate. Appreciating that it went down from 2019 to 2020. Can some of that be attributable to COVID?
Some of it likely is, as well as the closure, the closure of schools, as well as some changes to how the department prioritizes the outcomes for youth who are, for which they receive complaints, has led to the decrease in some of that. But it may also is also representative of overall youth arrests going down over the last decade or so. That's data that typically would have been included at the start of the analysis document, but that we don't have updated data for yet.
Okay. And then my question, do we have any kind of understanding of those served by age breakdown?
That does exist and is contained within the department's data resource guide, which is published annually. I've not included any specific information in the analysis document, but if there's a specific question that you're curious about or a comparison of the different age brackets, I can certainly get that to you, or you can ask the department.
Could you get us what you have, the subcommittee, and we'll go from there?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Senator Salling.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick questions. One is that I see we had two projects that we were talking about on page 26, two different detention centers in school. And why I know this was a problem for a period of time, but I think at one time, correct me if I'm wrong, that they scheduled funds for 2025 for Charles Hickey, but they changed that now to 2028 due to being more urgent funds priority. And I thought this was maybe one of the places that did have priority because of both the problems we have with placement. And we wanted to make sure we had areas in the area or the state of Maryland, but you've gone out of state. So I was just wondering why, were they holding that back or just not doing that?
I think some of that has to do with the overall department's caseload trends, but I would ask that you direct that question to the department for today, and I can follow up if there's more needed.
And also just the in-state, out-state, I think they would probably have their answers also for that of the placements.
Placements outstate have decreased since the COVID pandemic started. One of the priorities of the department had been to keep youth as close to their community as possible. That doesn't always mean it's within state isn't always technically the closest. If you're traveling, depending on where the detention or committed placement or treatment center for the youth may be relative to their home. But in general, Maryland being closer, it was prioritized. I believe starting in fiscal 2020, there's been a real concerted effort to keep youth in state.
And one more thing real quick, if you don't mind. The MD thing, this new program they want to put in place, they were saying there was right now no funds allocated to that in any way. I guess I'm assuming they could have some interest on that maybe, or.
So there are funds that will be attributed to that program, but because it's in in concert with Do It, the way that the funds show up in the DJS budget is as a state cost allocation to Do It, and that's something that it doesn't stand out on its as a line item, I suppose, for DJS. It's something that And they're able to provide a little bit greater detail on like how much the actual dollars are for MD Think versus any other IT support that they get from Do It.
So down the road eventually.
Down the road, like there is a number that joining the program costs, but it's not like the total number of the state implementing MD Think would be a question for the Do It analysis.
Okay. Right. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Okay, we are joined by Acting Secretary Schiraldi and Mr. DiBattista.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity, Chair Elfreth and members of the committee, to respond to the Department of Legislative Services fiscal year 2024 budget analysis. Department of Juvenile Service. I'm joined by Mike DiBattista. He's our Chief Financial Officer, and Kara Anson, Director of Legislation, Policy and Reform, is right behind me. I'd like to start by thanking Ms. Miller for her thorough analysis. I'm proud to join the Maryland Department of Juvenile Services, and this is my first testimony, so I'm very glad to be here. I'm particularly proud to further Governor Moore's goal of leaving no one behind. Over the past decade, DJS has experienced, as you've heard, significant declines in the number of young people referred to our system, as well as reductions in the utilization of incarceration, out-of-home placements, and community supervision. As these populations have declined, recidivism rates have also consistently dropped each year, indicating that the state can have positive public safety outcomes for young people, less youth incarceration, and greater equity. DJS is in the beginning stages of implementing two major reform efforts aimed at improving how young people experience Maryland's juvenile justice system. One is the juvenile justice reform legislation. The other is creating a new juvenile services education program. First, Maryland General Assembly passed the Juvenile Justice Reform Bill during the 2022 legislative session, which took effect on June 1st, 2022. DJS is committed to working with juvenile justice stakeholders, the courts, prosecutors, defense attorneys, law enforcement, educators, social service and mental health personnel, families, young people, and community leaders to ensure that the implementation of the new law is successful. So far, data from the first 6 months of implementation already indicate a positive impact on system operations and outcomes, specifically as required by the new legislation. DJS has increased the utilization of successful diversion strategies and decreased the utilization of incarceration for low-risk young people. This comports with the research and experience that shows that incarcerating low-risk youth increases their risk of reoffending, and that diverting low-risk youth can improve their recidivism outcomes. On July 1st, 2022, the Juvenile Services Education Program transitioned from the Maryland Department of Education to the Department of Juvenile Services. DJS and JSEP leadership collaborated with the Department of Budget and Management to support the education staff during the operational changes, and were even able to provide an increase in teacher salaries. As a member of the JSEP board, I'm excited to work along with the entire board and JSEP program staff to expand the available offerings and improve education services to the young people in our facilities. My vision for DJS is to continue to improve public safety through direct community engagement. Enlisting local communities in partnership with DJS will help change our young people's trajectory to one of hope and success. Our probation officers are going to be in their lives a very short period of time, as you know, as the child of two probation officers. But they're going to live in those communities, most of them, for the rest of their lives or much of the rest of their lives. They're going to see people in their communities, supermarkets, at church, on basketball courts, just walking down the street. The majority of our young people return home, so building strong connections with communities will improve outcomes for these young people, not just by reducing their recidivism rates, but also by improving positive outcomes like educational attainment, workforce development, civic engagement, access to arts and athletic programs, and other positive youth development opportunities. Those are the kind of opportunities all of us want for our own kids. By partnering with communities that are least resourced and most heavily impacted, DJS can promote a safer and fairer and more just and equitable youth justice system. I'm also committed to finding solutions to address the needs of young people who, despite being the smallest percentage of our population, gain the most community attention and media attention. The youth sent to us for violent offenses, as well as youth who are under age 13 who have been diverted by the recent change in the law. I look forward to starting an inclusive agency strategic planning process to chart a course for DJS into the future. I've committed to visiting every local office, every detention facility, and every treatment facility we operate. These visits will ensure that the strategic planning process is inclusive of staff, youth, families, and communities we serve. I'm also committed to ensuring the strategic planning process is transparent and that the public and system stakeholders have ample opportunity to inform how DJS best serves Marylanders. I've given you written responses to the two issues that you raised. I'm happy to read them, or what would you like me to do, Chair?
If you could just summarize.
Yeah, I'll give them a quick summary. We have a 23-year-old case management system. There's been one or two technology changes over the last 23 years, so we're trying to have a new one. But the good thing I think about Maryland Think is we're going to do it in collaboration with our sister agencies who touch these same kids. And we're trying to stand up a no wrong door attitude so that, families need help, they get help, rather than you're only getting help if you're in this door or that door. And also, I think that it'll have the advantage of being more user-friendly for our staff and giving me good access to data at my fingertips, and hopefully helping us draw down on like 4E funds and other federal reimbursements. Then as far as the temporary facility closures goes, as this sharp decline you've seen, the department's gradually closed. I think it's now five facilities. Noise is temporarily closed. I really want to do an evaluation. I mean, I think that we really have to sit down with our key stakeholders and say, how many kids you think can be in the community? This is what we have. This is the universe of what we have. We know their risks. We know their offense levels. We're going to build up some programs, as I mentioned, where young people can be served in the communities, judge, prosecutor, law enforcement officer, defense attorney. How's that sound to you? No, that's not good enough. We need more of this. So then we'll just form that consensually, because they are my market audience in many respects. If the courts don't use the community programs, then we're going to need more facilities. If they use the community programs, we might need less facilities. So we have to spend some time talking to them and going through that, data-driven, science-driven, but also consensual, to find out maybe they want something different in, Chincoteague than they do in Baltimore. And so once we do that, that'll be time well spent. We'll have a much better idea of what kind of facilities we need, where we need them, gender breakdowns and things like that. At that point, we'll make decisions about whether noise does or does not stay open, as well as a bunch of other decisions.
Thank you. I said it before for the last secretary, but I'll say it for you as well. We appreciate that you've inherited a lot of the challenges and that you are less than 30 days on the job. And so just recommitting that the subcommittee is your partner in solving a lot of these common challenges. I have about 4 questions, Senator Jackson. I'm going to ask a couple and then I'm going to go to you, and then if that's okay. So, Mr. Secretary, similar to a question I asked every secretary, you have a relatively high vacancy rate in a department that is critical for public safety. Can you talk to us about what goal this subcommittee should hold your department to when we meet again next year?
I heard you mention the governor's goal.
Yes.
So I don't have any different goals than the governor does.
Okay.
My goal is his goal, 8%.
8%. Okay.
As you see, we have 308 vacancies. We have about 165 positions right now that either have a start date, they have a commitment or a pending commitment for employment. So I'm hoping that we're already below that. I guess it was a 15.48% vacancy rate, just given what we have. But of course, we're not going to get every one of them in, and some people will leave in the meantime. So I think we've started out pretty good. They have, gotten, as was mentioned, an incentive package for RAs that's going to splay out over 3 years, so they don't just take the incentive the first year and leave. But just in general, our staff is our most important resource. I spent 10, 11 hours at Cheltenham the other day. Staff looked tired. This has been a really hard time for people in correctional facilities, our facilities, and Acting Secretary Scruggs' facilities. All power to them for sticking it out. And hope is on the way. We really do want to hustle more and more staff to relieve them so they don't have to work forced doubles and be as tired and as they are. So we're aiming for the 8%.
Okay.
I hope we even do better than that.
Okay, I hope you print that out and put it on
Yep.
your door. Okay.
Stick it on my door.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't emphasize what we heard from the employees earlier, that it's not just
Yeah.
recruitment, it's also retention.
Yep,
And I know that you
absolutely.
know that. Okay.
Yep.
One more question on the unspent funds. That's not particularly common.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit about how you're going to ensure that you're utilizing every resource that this General Assembly provides?
Yes, sorry for interrupting. Yeah, I don't like to have kids with this many needs, both in the facilities and in the community, and giving back funds. When Mike explained that to me, I was like, wow, I can't believe that's happening. Procurement does take a long time, so we're gonna have to try to put our pedal to the floor while at the same time recognizing that everything just doesn't turn around overnight. But I two areas where I think we do need more programming is in the facilities, in custody, which is, it's about 1 out of every 7 or 8 of our kids. And most people think of us as that, but really way more kids, 7 or 8 times as many kids are in the community. But that said, there's a lot of, there's some idleness at night, a lot of card playing and basketball shooting. So I want to expand programming in the facilities so that when kids come out, they come out better off than when they came in, and then really expand it in the community where there needs to be a warm handoff when kids come out, because there's a drop off, and then that's when bad things happen, especially in the first 2-3 months. Yeah. That's when kids get in the most trouble. We need to have something right away so that doesn't happen. I don't have all the answers to that yet because it's day 11 for me, but that's what I want to talk to the judges about. I want to talk to the prosecutors about, the police about, my own staff, families and kids. They're going to have ideas and answers, and then I'm going to spend money on those ideas and answers.
We appreciate
as long as they, meet with science.
Okay. And fortunately for you, this committee is also in charge of procurement policy. So if there are changes, please come to us as well.
Excellent.
Senator Jackson, then Senator Sullivan.
Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Welcome.
Thank you.
Your team. I've had the luxury of in a few of my lives to serve in multiple capacities regarding public safety. So one of which was the sheriff of Prince George's County. So when you talk about Cheltenham, I'm very familiar with that. Spent 24 years down that agency. Secondly, I worked under then Governor O'Malley, leadership development and public safety. So I have done what you're seeking, what you have committed to do, visit every one of your facilities, as well as work with your dynamic agency over the years. And we have seen a tremendous effort in walking down the challenges. And it's like, we're dealing with human beings, so we can't just set things and forget it. But we are excited that the Moore administration is looking to take what is working and enhance it, and to address those things that we haven't gotten to yet. So, as the chair mentioned, we are your partners. This is all of us. We're talking about our kids.
Yep.
This is all of us. So we will do any and everything we can to help you move forward. A couple of things I'd like to ask you for, and maybe it was mentioned earlier, but your recruiting and retention numbers, can you kind of have us walk along that trek with you as you're doing it, if you can keep us up to date on that? I know the agency and we, as your partners, we would love to continue to receive annual reports of your progress. And we would love to walk along with you in your strategic plan, that living and breathing document, if at all possible. I served on the Juvenile Justice Reform Council when I was on the House side. Unfortunately, when I came to the Senate side, they kicked me off. They wouldn't let me do it. That was one of the most, I think, well put together councils that I've seen during my time, either as a legislator or a prior. You mentioned it had all the stakeholders at the table that were needed. Now, the we didn't finish the educational component, so I'm glad to hear that the educational component of it hasn't been dropped off, that it's still moving forward. The challenge, as we know with juveniles, sometimes they're only in there 30 days. They've already been out of school in some cases. And so how do you measure that? So again, we want to walk with you on that. And lastly, Madam Chair, the reentry component of it. You know, oftentimes we look at it on the adult side, but it's just as important, if not more important, with our juveniles. So they're, you know, we are willing to work with you regarding that as well. And I don't know if the chair has a wish list or a question list from our colleague here, but we've been working very diligently on apprenticeships, internships, and the reentry component. There are a number of efforts that we have out here to help folks get reacclimated to the community, to give them a viable outlet. I'm not going to be able to move as a 15-year-old when I come home. So I've got to go back to the same community, but I need to have some productive activities that are associated with that will lead me to life skills. So again, we're your partner, excited about you and your team and continuing the great work that we've seen over the years. So
Thank you so much, Senator. Just two quick comments based on what you said. One is the educational opportunity that we have right now. Kid by kid, I talked to a lot of kids at Cheltenham, and they liked the school. And I toured the school, the classrooms. You know how you can smell a good classroom. You know, it's all that stuff up on the walls and work product. And you know, the English class had this great big thing about Edgar Allan Poe. The teachers were really leaning into it, and I think we need to figure out a way with the JSEP board to sort of nurture that, and maybe even have some evening clubs, and you know, like a robotics club or a chess club, or it's academic.
Invite the community in, absolutely.
As we've talked to the educators there, they're excited about those possibilities. The other thing is, you know, when I met with Senator Rosepep, because he's also on the confirmation committee, and I spoke to him, he talked about apprenticeships, and you know, the governor obviously talks a lot about service. Absolutely. I think our kids will learn a lot if we can hook them up with those kind of service learning opportunities. Very often they're not traditional learners, as you know, and school's not been a good experience for them. You know, a lot of them have learning disabilities, but hands-on, they do good work. They don't have those opportunities as much as they should. And I really hope to be able to expand that.
Well, we're excited to hear that because, you know, oftentimes we have to meet people where they are.
Yep.
Otherwise, you know, they're going to find a way to navigate the world on their own. And lastly, Madam Chair, seriously, lastly, the Cheltenham facility and others. I mean, when an environment is conducive to growth, then people will grow.
Yep.
If an environment is conducive to detention, they'll act accordingly. So I appreciate what the agency has done, and we look forward to what you're going to do in the future. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Secretary, for all the information. As we've seen in the complaints that rose over for a period of time, especially the pandemic era and the times we see the numbers and how extreme they are.
Yep.
But I see that there are still a large percentage where they didn't receive court, but they had some type of intervention. You know, they had different types that they did go to court, and some they didn't have to go, but they resolved it in other ways in intake.
Correct.
And I know the biggest problem I think we've had is those that maybe were in for a minor thing or whatever that problem was. And, you know, it's just a one-time incident, but there's repeat offenders and they repeat over and over and over. And at times, I think you said it right, Senator, you know, we don't have things in place, and that's where I was going, that we could have them get in a place where they're not repeating it. And that's been the problem. I don't care where you live now.
Yep.
Everywhere you go, in Baltimore City, in Baltimore County,
right, in
other counties. And we just want to make sure that we have everything in place, that we make sure that it doesn't happen over and over and over again. I meet with our police officers in our county, and I talk with them. I talk to security in malls. I talk to them in our schools, and I see some of the problems we have, and it's ongoing. I just want to make sure that we have better things in place for our young people, our juveniles that are out there, that they don't have those avenues. There's some places that they do, and they have opportunity, and it's changed them. It's changed their life. But then there's other areas where I guarantee you, Baltimore City doesn't have those opportunities.
Yeah.
They don't. And it's sad. And I think other areas in Baltimore County, they don't have those opportunities. And I just want to make sure that if we're giving it to one part, we're giving it throughout the whole state. We're making sure that the opportunities are all there for all of our young people, that they don't go back to where they committed that crime and do it all over again. And I'm telling you, I seen it firsthand in the city, living there at times as a child with my grandmother on East Baltimore Street and seeing the problems we had there. And it's major change, but we can do better. I know we can. And I hope we can go to a place where we can say, wow, we've come here and just, we know the numbers, we know the percentages, but I believe we do have answers and we want to do all that we can to work with you and to make a difference for young people. And I want to thank you.
Thank you so much. I couldn't agree more. No one is served well when a kid gets picked up and released and there's nothing that happens. It shouldn't be nothing that happens, right? Just because it's not incarceration, it shouldn't be incarceration every time, sometimes, yes. But there's a continuum of responses that we need to make sure exists everywhere in the state. And that's going to take some building to do. But until we do that, we will have frustrated police and frustrated merchants and frustrated people living in communities. Once we build that, there'll still be frustration, there'll still be crime, but at least we can hold our heads up high and say, we didn't just ignore this. We actually did something about it. That's exactly what I want to try and do. I couldn't agree with you more.
And you see the numbers going down.
Yeah.
I think it's so important because we see the numbers at times, they fluctuate and we see that depending on where you live too at times. But we want to see where we can see those numbers are so high, but we're really achieving something and we watch those numbers go down.
That's right.
And we're really doing some really good things. I think that is one of my problems that and the biggest problem that I do have is those that are affected from it. It's other young people that are affected from it too and families. And we need to help those out too. We need to find ways where that person has 5 or 4 other siblings and then maybe something happened in the class and everybody in the class. We do some things, but I think still there's not something that we're putting in place because a lot of the behaviors and attitudes haven't changed. So maybe there's something we can work on, but I
agree with you, Senator. We have to do better, like you said. Yep.
Thank you.
So I appreciate your comments about filling in gaps because currently we're incredibly siloed in terms of response and services. So I'm going to turn to a couple incidents. I represent Anne Arundel County. So had an incident just last month of a 12-year-old bringing a loaded gun to school. Obviously, that child did not stumble upon it on the road. There are issues in the home. There's accountability that needs to be dealt with at the home. At the same time, how can we be assured that that child is receiving and the family are receiving services as necessary because they're not being arrested because of the measures that this General Assembly has taken? And yet what's the process now to assure the public and most importantly, the child and the family that the services are being met?
Right. So there are a couple of things that can happen to young people under the age of 13 when they engage in the kinds of behaviors that used to result in formalization, but now no longer can. And I'm just not sure we've done a good job of explaining that to the general public and particularly to law enforcement and other potential referral sources like schools. So one thing is there's plenty of informal services we can provide in situations like that. We don't actually even have to formalize the case at all to be able to provide services. But then there's the SINS process, the children in need of supervision process.
My next question, yes.
Right. And we're the ones that would be the ones, sort of making that recommendation. The court has to order it. There's a whole array of services the court can order, including us to supervise a kid, including us even to take the kid out of home. They cannot put them in a locked facility, but pretty much everything else DJS has available to it is available on a SINS petition. What I don't think we've done well enough and what I've started to talk to my staff about already is to explain that to the primary referral sources around the state, which is police, schools, families. We're in the process right now of creating a bench book, which kind of lays that out. Needs a little work. It was a little too legalistic. It's not user-friendly. So, we sort of said, all right, committee, go back there and make this something that your brother-in-law could understand, not your lawyer. But also then to do lunch and learns, essentially to sit down with law enforcement, schools, families, and with my staff over a table, explain to them the process when they have a kid. There's not that many of these kids, but they do wag the dog. And so we should pay attention. Same with the violent ones on the other end, right?
Yes.
The very violent kids and these 12-year-olds, there's not a lot, but when they happen, law enforcement, schools, families, they want reactions. And so we need to explain that better. And then we need to live by what we explain. We can't just explain it and then not follow up.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think there's a lot of education with our partners and just the general public that needs to happen, that there are services, that there is a process. Can we talk a little bit more about SINs? Because I had that written down next. And its availability, from my understanding, varies by county at the moment.
The services or
The services. Is that not true?
I believe that's true. Yeah.
It does vary by
I
county.
believe that's true,
Okay.
yes.
And so and I'm not an attorney, but to dig into the process a little bit here. So if SINs requires a judge, a court action, yet we have a 12-year-old who cannot be arrested. So what's going to trigger that SINs in that moment?
Okay, I'm going to say some things now.
Okay.
Kara's nervous. No, she's actually coming up. Kara, why don't you, because I know I drank this through a fire hose
Yep.
In the last 2 weeks, but Kara knows it a little better than I do.
Thank you.
Okay, so if there is an instance, am I okay on the mic? Okay, where a complaint comes to us and we believe that a SINS is an appropriate way to handle that case, we would use our normal tools that we have. So we have an intake decision tool. We'd have an intake with the family. So we'd sit down with the family and the young person and we would identify what are your needs, what service needs you have, and then we could connect them to services. We would use all of the services that we have in our service array. If for whatever reason that does not work, then we could take that to the court and petition the court and then have the court intervene. And then through there, like the secretary was talking about, we could have a formal petition and then the young person could go to a group home or be ordered to additional services. So we have an opportunity as DJS to work with that family and intervene and supervise them. Additionally, we could move it to the court.
Yes, that's helpful, but that all assumes that in this case in Anne Arundel, our Anne Arundel PD has reached out to you, and I don't know if they have or not.
Right.
But that assumes that a trigger has been.
Right, and it's a police report. It's what they send to us all the time, right? It's their regular police report. That's all they have to send to us, just like a normal complaint process is. So it's nothing special. It's no form like special SINS paperwork that they fill out, right? We get the complaint, we look at it, we say, oh, this is a SINS case, and then we move forward.
Okay. Because
There
I
has
think
been a
that's
slight increase in SINS petitions since the law went into effect as well.
that's helpful. I think there will be more as
Absolutely.
the education, and I'm very encouraged by your willingness to go out and help educate our partners. It's going to be essential here, especially our police departments. Okay. Speaking of, does the department ever do a post review of services when there's a rearrest or when there's a violent incident? Do you ever go back and review and say, here's what we did well, here are the gaps that we did not meet?
Yeah, we do one internally. Partly that's to learn, partly that's to discipline, frankly, sometimes. And then we also do the state advisory board does one that's more public, right?
It's public, but those are for serious cases where we had a young person die.
Okay.
Fatality review board.
I know you're 11 days in. I'm very curious what those reports, if there's trends or if there are gaps or, where we can help you fill them.
Sometimes lightning strikes, even though we were doing everything well.
Understood.
Human
behavior.
I've seen a couple where we were not doing anywhere near what we should be doing. So it really runs the full gamut. And I haven't seen a sort of systematized report on trends. I'm not sure if one exists.
We can definitely look into getting that for you, and we can get all the information from the fatality review boards that we have.
Very helpful.
And that's fatality either way, whether the kids get killed more than they kill people, which is both of which are tragic. So we do fatality review boards either way.
Okay, that's helpful. And then filling it, you mentioned in your testimony, Mr. Secretary, filling in gaps of community partners. Can you talk to us a little bit about your strategy there?
Yes, I can. So the first thing I want to do is a sort of analysis of what we have, right? What's the sort of lay of the land statewide, because it's going to be very different in different places. I want to simultaneously, so we have some good contracts with some good providers we're underutilizing. So there's already why are we not making as many referrals as we need to make? So I need to look at my probation staff and my facility staff who do the evaluations of the kids. But then also, where was I going with that? Oh, just to look at what in our continuum needs to be brought in beyond a sort of model of sort of mostly mentoring type programs that we have now? What workforce development, what educational programs, what civic engagement programs can we be utilizing? And I think there's going to be people in communities that will have these skills and interests to do these things. So when I was head of juvenile justice in DC, for example, somebody came up with this idea that for the summer youth employment program, our kids, there's a lot of aging family members whose, community members whose sons and daughters had moved away, and their houses just were terrible. Then, overgrown lawns and all that stuff. So one of my guys in my facility was the groundskeeper, and he said, Vinny, I'll take these kids out for the summer youth employment program. We have all the tools right here. I can train them. We'll cut lawns in Ward 5, which is where his church was. And he knew all these people from church. I'm telling you, like, I went to these people's houses. I wanted these kids to come to my house. It was beautiful. And it was all for free. And now what's happening is these are scary kids that normally these mostly women would cross the street to avoid. Now they know all their names. They're beautifying their communities. They're feeding them lemonade and chicken. I kid you not, right? I go to one house, all the boys are sitting there eating the whole jobs. So I just want to say that because those people exist all around the state of Maryland, and they know what their neighborhood needs in ways that a centralized bureaucracy can never know. And so we just have to tap into that. And then once we do, we have to resource those people, because right now, a lot of them are just doing these jobs out of the back of their cars or their kitchens. I believe in volunteerism, but people also got to earn a living. And so, those are just some examples.
No, that's helpful. I encourage you to meet on your road tour with the local management boards across
Yes.
the counties, because they will be a plethora of good connections for those community services as well.
Great idea. Thank you.
Senator Jackson, I have one final after that.
Yes, and very quickly, I don't know do you all have anything in place, or can you put something in place to get some feedback from the young folks that come to your facility? It's very important.
Yes, we will absolutely.
We saw the benefit of that on that reform council, and I think if your facilities do that, we can kind of get the gist of direction we need to be going in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, last question for now is the Baltimore City Strategic Partnership.
Yes.
I'm brand new to the subcommittee, but looking at the timeline, I can tell you you're new, the mayor's new, the state's attorney's new, police commissioner's new. I would encourage everything you can to reinvigorate that formal partnership.
Absolutely.
I think it's going to be key here.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I totally agree.
And then 11 days in, sounds like you're doing everything you should be doing at this moment. Please stay close with this subcommittee over the course of not just session, but your first year. We, again, are partners to you in this work. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Okay, we have one witness, Miss Johnson.
Good afternoon. I would first like to take the time to thank the members of the Senate for hearing me out today. My name is Denise Henderson Johnson. I am a DJS Transportation Officer for the Department of Juvenile Services. And I also serve as the president of AFSCME Local 3167, representing the Department of Juvenile Services employees. As a state employee, working in one of Maryland's state agencies, I continue to work more with less. I have shown up to work at DGS for the past 17 years as a state employee and seen my resources diminish every year, significantly in the last administration. When there are not enough resources allotted to public services, workers like me, we suffer, and our clients suffer. When I started, we had enough staff to do the job safely, and we were making a difference in public safety. This is no longer occurring in my agency. My fellow coworkers and I are stretched thin, trying to do extra work to make up for the many vacancies within the agency. I, as a transportation officer, often must assume the roles of other classifications due to the critical staffing crisis. I do these duties, but I never receive any additional pay. The issue of understaffing continues to be a concern of mine and many other state employees. This issue was heightened even more during the pandemic, and we are losing staff daily due to the lack of pay increases, step increases, and COLAs. I know the residential advisors just received a raise, and they are a critical part of this agency, but so are several other classifications to ensure the mission of this agency is carried out as well. The issues with pay have been a contributing factor for staffing for more than a decade now. In the previous budget, the governor did not include a pay increase for DJS workers, any additional pens or any other resources to adequately serve out the mission of this agency. DJS employees and other hardworking state employees are trying to provide for their families while making sacrifices during a pandemic and after. They don't feel like they're appreciated. As a transportation officer for DJS, I know that understaffing hinders DJS's mission to help juvenile offenders overcome their behaviors and be productive adults, because we constantly see them, the same youth, as a revolving door. DJS has some of the most passionate people that work for this agency because we want to help the youth of Maryland. But how long do you effectively think that they can do this with limited resources? I am asking this committee to add additional funds to the DJS budget so that we can serve the population adequately and make their return to the communities more effective. We at DJS believe we matter. We deserve fair and just compensation to keep up with inflation, just like every other working class individual in the country. It's only fair. And I want to say, we're here to work with the new administration, the legislators. We are parents ourselves. Half of these children we work with, we see in our own communities. We help them out in the communities and nobody knows. We want the programming, we want the help. A lot of us that's been there 17, 20, 15 years, we don't want to retire, but we have no other choice. Because I've been there 17 years, if I want to make over $50,000, I had to get a second job and I would have to work overtime. So it's hard for people. You have people that want to do the job. They want to stay in the job. They want to train new people coming into the job, but you have to help the people so they can help the people that they work for. And that's what I have to say.
Thank you very much, Ms. Henderson Johnson. We appreciate your public service to the state and for being here today. Senator Jackson.
I just wanted to echo or mention, as I did with DPSCS, let's please make sure we have those, your testimony in writing. So thank you all. Sorry.
No, thank you. And similar to our thoughts on community supervision, I'm curious when the last time we had a salary scale review.
So portions of the DJS staff have had like some salary stuff. There's that one that's currently like being done for educational providers. But I can get in touch with DBM to see when the last time it would have been for particular classifications.
I appreciate that. Okay, seeing no other questions, reminder to the subcommittee that ends our hearing today, but tomorrow we are back. We are hearing 4 budgets, the Judiciary, Maryland Department of Emergency Management, MDOT WMATA, and DPSCS corrections. And then unlike most of our colleagues, we're back on Monday as well. In this same room. Tomorrow's at 11:30, Monday's at 1 for 4 more budgets.